Hello, my name is Dylan, and for my project, I've chosen to do an archaeological history of Ireland. So let's jump right into it. All right, there I am. That is me. This is a photo of me taken in Romania. I was climbing up a hill, and I was sorely underprepared for that. But there I am. I'm also right here. Hopefully, I just did a little box around around the webcam, but that is me. Um, Let me start by asking, what is archaeology? Um, Archaeology is the study of human history and prehistory through the excavation of sites and the analysis of artifacts, physical remains, and scientific evidence. Um, Essentially, it is all of human history, whatever we leave behind. That is what archaeology is. At its core, archaeology seeks to uncover and understand the human experience. By examining every piece of evidence left behind, be it tools, ruins, or traces of ancient life, archaeologists weave together the intricate tapestry of our shared story. Um, this field spans most every discipline, drawing upon science, linguistics, anthropology, history, music, art, whatever it is. And it provides us a comprehensive view of what it means to be human. Um, Through archaeology, we glimpse into the full spectrum of our human life. I mean, every moment of laughter, sorrow, struggle, creativity, and even the mundane is revealed to us, and it's revealed to us how our ancestors lived that. Um, we have been modern or biologically modern humans for about 300 years or so. Uh, as you see at the beginning there, I don't know, I hope you can see my mouse, but at the beginning there, the Homo sapiens, which started around 0 million years ago because we are Homo sapiens, um, we have existed for about 300,000 years. But all of these other skulls that you see in front of you are our ancestors. We as humans have been developing for a long, long, long time. Um, but as we exist today, we are the same that we were 300,000 years ago. Our technologies may have changed, our cultures very much may, have very much changed, um, but we're still biologically the same. What this means is the same sorrow that you feel or the same happiness that you feel is the same that people would have been feeling 300,000 years ago. So when you find a cool rock, that's somewhat primal, you know? um, I know I enjoy it, um, but I think that means something that for over 300,000 years we've been living the same existence. It's just kind of cool. Um, the What we try to do in archaeology is create what's called the archaeological record or an archaeological record. That's essentially an encyclopedia of all of human experience. We use all the resources gathered together to create this kind of cohesive document or library of information from that. Um, Overall, though, archaeology is both very scientifically based, but it's also a deeply human endeavor. It's our shared story and how we got here, why we existed in the past. Alright. So, moving on. Um, as said previously, this is an archaeological history of Ireland, and it's kind of viewing the West and the Western world through the lens of Ireland. But let me start with what is Ireland? Ireland is this beautiful island you see right in front of you. It's mostly green. You got some brown, which I will get into in a little while. Um, but Ireland is an island located in the North Atlantic Ocean. It's just west of Great Britain. You can start to see it to the right there. Parts of what is it? Like Wales and Scotland up in the north. Um, the island is politically divided into two entities. We have the Republic of Ireland, commonly referred to simply just as Ireland, or what you really think of when you think of Ireland. And Then there's also Northern Ireland, which is presumably in the northern half of Ireland, which is owned and governed by the United Kingdom. This division arose for many, many different reasons, but I won't get into that now, or not fully. But for all intents and purposes, this is the island of Ireland. It shares a very unified culture and people. Um, Geologically, though, Ireland has undergone dramatic changes over millennia. Most notably, the most recent, at least, change that had been undergone on the island was the introduction of the Devonian ice sheet. So it came in about 25,000 years ago, as you see denoted by that blue line. That was the glacial maxima, or the maximum extent of that glacial ice sheet. And then about 16,000 years ago, so about 14,000 BC, the ice sheet began to recede. Um, this ice sheet created an ice bridge between Scotland and Northern Ireland for quite a while. Um, but it also shaped the landscape. I mean, when you think of the hills or the mountains or like the highlands of Scotland, it's thanks to this ice sheet and thanks to all the ice sheets that came before it that allow us to have the landscape that we see today. Uh, Fun fact, Ireland, Scotland, Morocco, and the Appalachian Mountains are all part of the same chain of mountains that existed together before the continent split up from Pangaea. So we all share a very similar geological history um, in that regard. And then, so like I said, by 14,000 BC or so, there was an ice bridge that was connecting both Britain and Ireland. But by about 12,000 BC, so about 14,000 years ago, the two lands were officially separated as the ice sheet receded. Um, the history of human activity in Ireland is just as fascinating as the geological one. Um, the earliest confirmed evidence of human presence date back to about 12,500 BC. We know that thanks to this article right here in front of you. Um, this is the kneecap of an ancient bear that was found in a cave outside of County Clare. As you see there, the knee, so that, like I said, this is a knee bone. That knee bone has some distinct straight markings on it. Um, what we believe this to be is the markings of a long, kind of crude flint blade that was attempting to butcher this. This is us. We are here, and we are killing bears, or at least scavenging off of them and processing their meat. Um, cool. We're here 12,500 years ago, or 12,500 BC. um, yeah, we radiocarbon dated, which I'll explain in a little while. Um, but thanks to this discovery in this limestone cave, we are fairly confident that humans existed there. Um, there was a study done in 2021 using uh, it was a reindeer bone that was found back in the early 1900s, 19 teens. Um, that showed human butchering marks. However, I tentatively include that as uh, that's said to be about 33,000 years old, which would just completely change our picture of human habitation throughout the entirety of the West, especially Ireland. So, with, grain of salt, between 33,000 years ago and 12,500 years ago, we have humans on the island of Ireland. Um, by about 8,000 BC, we see the introduction of Mesolithic hunter-gatherers. This is a recreation of what one of their houses would have looked like. As you see, it is next to essentially a marsh. It is made out of reed structure, kind of thatched together, like you see on a lot of thatched roofs today. It has bark and animal skin atop it to retain the heat, and it's just generally it's a structure. We're not living in caves, but that is not much, I must say. Um, but about 8,000 BC, we start to see the Mesolithic hunter-gatherers inhabit this land. Um, in around 4500 BC, the Neolithic period began in Ireland. It was marked by profound cultural and technological advancements. Neolithic settlers introduced the cultivation of cereal crops, kind of like what we saw in the Fertile Crescent. We also have proof of domesticated animals and more improved and innovative archaeological, it's all on my mind, agricultural practices. Um, During this time, they would construct large timber and stone structures, including megalithic tombs, like what we see here. This is the Newgrange site, just about 45 kilometers northwest of Dublin. Um, and they would also develop, I mean, as evidence of this, they would have developed a sophisticated and organized society to some regard. Um, yeah, it's just cool. Newgrange site, I'm not going to touch on it in this presentation, but it is an incredibly complex and massive megalithic structure that is just absolutely gorgeous. And as you see in the stone, this like entry stone in the front, it has this little swirl pattern. It's called the triskele, one of my favorite ancient symbols. You find it all across the Western world. It's like it symbolizes the infiniteness of life, death, and what comes after that. Yeah, it's just cool. Um, but through all these changes, Ireland has evolved from an nearly, I mean, arguably uninhabitable glacial ice sheet to a forested and wild sea of hills, and now to the arable and sweeping land that we know it as today. Its rich history is a testament to the resilience and ingenuity of her people and nature. I mean, who have shaped and been shaped by this land for thousands of years. Um, but Dylan, I hear you ask, theoretically, why did you choose Ireland? Well, Ireland is a land that is rich in archaeological significance. It offers a truly like unique window into the past that we don't see many other places throughout the Western world. Um, as I'll touch on, I feel like I keep saying that, but as I'll touch on in a little bit, the Irish peat bogs are incredibly important in the preservation of delicate archaeological sites. And Ireland just so happens to be one of the perfect places for these to develop. About 16% of the land in Ireland is peat bog. Um, these bogs are nearly perfect at preserving soft tissue and like organic material, something that is sorely, sorely lacking from our archaeological record. So this is really cool. Um, I also chose Ireland. It is as it is like truly the westernmost edge of Europe. This is a position that has made it a crossroads for different cultures, but also kept it very homogenized and very culturally different. Um, Although during the Viking Age, the Norse cultures did come in. They really loved Ireland because we had a lot of beautiful and rich monasteries that were producing all these goods with all this gold and so much fun stuff that the Vikings were like, "Ooh, we can take this." But it also is significant to Celtic and different pagan religions and cultures as well. As said, I mean, it's an island, so it was uh, kind of sectioned off. It was kind of separated that way, and allowed the Irish culture to develop on its own more so. Um, why else though? Uh, as you see there, that is Ireland in its position. It's colored out in red. That little northern portion in blue is what's Northern Ireland, so it's not fully covered in. Like I said, when we think of Ireland, we usually think of the Republic of Ireland. Um, but another reason, a personal reason, is just this past November, or couple weeks ago, I took my first international flight. I was flying from Boston to Turkey, and then I was going to go to Cluj, which is a an old city in the northwestern part of Romania. But on that flight, at about like 6-ish, 7-ish hours in, um, I flew over Ireland right during the sunrise. And me not having traveled by plane more than like a couple hours, I flew down to Georgia once. I didn't know what a perpetual sunrise was. Um, but essentially, it felt like I was chasing the sunrise over this landscape. Um, I watched. I had the map up in front of me nearly the entire trip. It was really boring over the Atlantic. I mean, there was nothing you could even wish to see. It was completely pitch black, and I mean, it was just the ocean below you. Um, but it feels like as soon as we began to like be able to see Ireland, um, the sun started to rise, and I saw just like the light melt across the emerald landscape, the rolling hills of the Central Plain, and like it's still green in winter, and I was just taken aback by that. And then you do see pockets of like this like truly rusty but like thick and full brown and red, it kind of in spots across the landscape. Um, but it was just absolutely gorgeous, and I was taken aback by it. Especially the green, it just seems to bleed into every single crevice of the earth there. Um, but for me, Ireland also holds a personal significance. My family lineage is deeply rooted in Gaelic and Celtic worlds. Nearly all of my great grandparents were born to Irish immigrants at the very least, if not being Irish and then eventually immigrants themselves. Most of my family had moved to Scotland or Cardiff in Wales, um, at some point around like the late 1800s, early 1900s. And my surname, Donahue, is an Americanized version of the Irish surname Donach, which means brown haired, which I feel like is fairly accurate. um, I also have the names Malachan, Foley, Riley, Corcoran, Joyce, Rogers, all adorning uh, adorning my family tree like ornaments on a Christmas tree. Um, those are all also names that come from the Irish world, mostly Southern Ireland, but a couple of my family lineage is a couple of people there are traced back to Armagh, which is in Northern Ireland. Um, but I also grew up with a lot of influences that I didn't really know for the longest while. Um, One of the ones I like to point out is that I have an appetite for tripe, um, although that is more so thanks to Quincy's Vietnamese influence. Every single bowl of pho that I have has tripe in it, but growing up, I would also have different tripe stews and stuff like that. And this did, for the most part, this taste did skip over both of my parents. Um, they both hate it. I mean, I get it. It's an acquired texture. There's not much taste, but the texture is definitely odd. Um, I gotta say, tripe is the lining of a cow's stomach. A cow, I believe, has four stomachs. I probably am wrong on that, but uh, cows have many stomachs. They need to break down their food a little bit more than we do because they're eating raw plant. um, But this was one of the absolute cheapest cuts of meat that you could get. For the longest time, tripe was used to feed animals. It was not seen as something that humans would want to consume. The only time that you would consume it, or at least that we have evidence of people consuming it in history, is during times of extreme poverty or extreme struggle. Um, as you may or may not know, the Irish, the island of Ireland went through a potato famine, which caused my family, but also thousands of other people from the island of Ireland to immigrate. So that's why I see my family moving to Scotland, moving to Wales, and then eventually to America. Um, but it was, it's we still hold on to the struggles and the scars of our pasts. And although mine is very insignificant, um, I still eat tripe. And my family has for seemingly at least the past nearly 200 years. I think that's kind of cool, but I think it's important to know the history of that. Um, Everywhere we walk, we carry who came before us and what came before us and what we've done and what we had become. Um, and for me, that is tripe in my belly. um, this is a portrait of my family. This on the old man with the beard is actually this is he is one of my only non-Irish relatives. Meet Henry Johansson, which is also the only relative that we know nearly nothing about. We know his name was Henry Johansson. We know he was from Sweden. Down in the very bottom of the photo, the ambiguous looking person that is in essentially a dress is my great great grandfather. Um, but yeah, no, this is my family. This is taken in the 1880s. Just kind of cool. That is tripe. That is, like I said, the lining of a cow's stomach. It's like spongy and stringy, and when you have it in soup, especially with noodles, you you don't really recognize the difference between that. You're just like, oh, this noodle is kind of chewy. But that is tripe, and it is really nice. Um, nope, not yet. I've also been invested. I'm going to leave you with tripe for a minute. I've also been invested in Irish culture and language, particularly because of the historic struggles against the forces that have sought to suppress and erode them. Um, there was something called a papal bull. It's essentially like if you think of like what an executive order is for the president, it's like it's what the Pope can do with that. But there was a papal bull called the Laudabilitaire. I'm hoping I said that right. Probably didn't. But this was essentially an order signed in 1155 by Pope Adrian IV, who was the only English pope, I must add, that authorized Henry II's invasion of Ireland. Um, from this moment forward, foreign intervention and foreign uh, influence over Ireland never ceases to exist. They struggle with it to this day. Like I said, the island is divided into two. Um, Although in the beginning and many times past, or like since then, um, the issue of Irish foreign influence has also been hand in hand with insider meddling. I mean, originally, um, this bill or this invasion was uh, asked for by the previous High King of Ireland after he was disposed of, um, and he wanted to get the crown back. Uh, but the Pope and Henry II were like, "You're not doing good enough. The church in Ireland was dealing with its own stuff. Imagine that, you know, dealing with your own local issues as opposed to some grand, grand picture. If you have people starving in your street, it's not like you're gonna really be like, hmm." I wonder what the president's doing right now. It's kind of hard to focus on that. Um, so the High King of Ireland asked them to come in, and it was a bunch of infighting throughout the church and throughout different towns and monasteries over who has control, what to believe. So Henry II was sanctioned to go into Ireland and um, solve that issue. Um, Now, was that a good thing? No, I can tell you that in full confidence. That was not a good thing, but it happened, and it's important to know that, and important to know where it comes from. And luckily, we have evidence of it. Um, for me, though, overall, Ireland's more than just a place. It's more than just a land. It's a source of my heritage, culture, and its inspiration. Its past informs how I exist today, and it's a story that I am deeply connected to, and I believe I will be for the rest of my life. So, with all of that said, I'm sorry I left you with tripe for so long. Um, let's get into a little bit about archaeology as a whole. Um, this is a picture of chalk sun. um, how are archaeological sites found and studied, though? History surrounds us, often hidden in plain sight. Almost any location could theoretically be considered an archaeological site. As humans, we humans have inhabited the places that we are now, like Ireland, for thousands of years. Um, the odds that someone has been in the same geographical location of you at some point is incredibly high. Um, and an archaeological site is essentially defined as any site where there's evidence of human interaction or human activity. I want you to think back to when you drew with chalk on the sidewalk, or say you discarded a piece of trash, or you left footprints in the mud. In doing so, you have thus created what would be considered an archaeological site. Um, Albeit this is a very minor one, and it's probably not significant, and it probably doesn't last. Um, and your chalk masterpiece, like the sun here, um, means not much, it's just something that you made. It's just something that you were doing. You were just existing. But that's exactly what archaeological sites are. Just typically, they're a lot older than what we like to think of them as. Um, I mean, like creating a chalk art on the sidewalk is no different than what, I mean, it is. It's a little bit, but it's truly no different, the act that you are undergoing, than what our ancestors did when they were painting on the cave walls. They were making art with, this is with natural material, but making art on stone surfaces that very well could have gotten washed away, or they could have been, you know, destroyed by light, broken down. It's a big issue for them. But you have created art. Same thing with trash. Every time you throw something away, it goes to a place, and hopefully not exactly like this, but somewhat like this. This is a landfill. Landfill is actually one of the most important archaeological sites that we can find because it is layers and layers and layers of what we use, what has been used by everyday humans. So every time you throw something away and it gets shipped away, you are contributing to a site that sometime in the future will be important. Um, as of right now, I mean, a lot of our landfills, they're just microplastic dumps. But it's, you're adding to that. We find dumps everywhere because we always have produced trash. It just so happens that for a while the trash was bones, and then it was, pottery, or it was bread that you didn't like. We often find those things preserved, but it's because of these layers that we're able to find that. Um, let's see. This is an example of an archaeological site in a McDonald's in Rome. When they were building this McDonald's, they found the floor or like an ancient Roman road underneath the floor. Um, like I said before, archaeological sites are just locations where remains of the human past exist. Um, Rome, for example, was the largest city on Earth for about 550 years. Um, it's rumored, or it's a myth, that Rome was founded in 753 BC by Romulus and Remus. Well, Romulus more so. It's not called Reme. That's the, you know, common joke. Um, but Rome has existed for at least 1,000 years, 1,000 years, hundreds of years. Um, and there's always been human life going on there. So you want to build a McDonald's, you gotta find a couple roads. And it just so happens that in these older cities, this happens quite often, especially a place like Rome where it's so significant. Um, but chance and location doesn't alone count for all archaeological discovery. Modern archaeologists rely on more sophisticated methods to identify and study sites. Technologies like ground penetrating radar, aerial surveys, and advanced dating techniques help pinpoint areas of interest before excavation even begins. These are called non invasive procedures. Um, this precision is crucial because archaeological digs are labor intensive, costly, and require careful planning to conduct ethically, which is a big part, and efficiently. Um, well, it is, you know, kind of tempting to think about what we can do if we had unlimited resources. Um, we don't, and we have to be careful because we don't want to destroy the history that's there because it is already so delicate. Um, a couple different methods of finding these archaeological sites include oral histories. What it looks like these women are doing here is recording an oral history of some sort. I'm assuming the younger woman is recording the older woman's responses to questions about her past. This could be, I mean, she could have murdered someone for all I know. I don't know what they're talking about, but I'm being optimistic because this is what popped up when I Googled oral history. But oral and written histories are both invaluable resources for archaeologists. As previously mentioned, humans we have certain needs and preferences and influences onto where we settle. So, like Rome, it was on top of a hill. It was near the like top of the River Tiber. Um, we needed that to survive there. Um, but when we settle in these places, these patterns tend to repeat over generations. And over time, we accumulate pieces of our lives and we'll pass them down. Oftentimes, this will be tied to the places that we exist in. Um, this can be something as simple as a campfire story or written word. I mean, this is also, that can be oral history. Um, the oral history can also just be a personal anecdote that, has been shared over generations. If you had one great great uncle who like slipped off a roof, fell, and then like when he got up off the roof, he slipped in a banana peel. That can be a family story for years, and it can kind of get turned into this mythical thing. But maybe he just like fell off a roof, and they were trying to make a joke out of it. But oral histories are very important to us because they are often hands somewhat skewed first-hand resources. Um, and then, well, written records are a lot more vast typically. They can result from anything to, from birth records, tax records, censuses. But at a small level, it could be grandma's cookie recipe. Um, Albeit, I will tell you, grandma's cookie recipe is just from the back of a box or from the back of a mix from like the 40s. The real secret ingredient was always love, but it can be something as simple as that. Um, for example, churches hold some of the most extensive and well kept birth. It's really what is it? Christenings and baptism records. But you would go and you'd get your kid baptized nearly every single time. That's how I know so much about my family. It's because we have those baptism records and marriage records, so we know who married who and when and how many kids they had eventually. Yeah, there is a birth certificate. It would be something like that. So, um, as our technology advances and our understanding of landscapes deepen, archaeologists are using more and more sophisticated methods to locate these potential sites. Predictive modeling, combined techniques like regression analysis and machine learning algorithms, which apply our understanding of human behavioral ecology, or essentially how people are adapting to their environment, and optimal foraging theory, which posits that both humans and animals alike will often search for food and nutrients in the shortest amount of time and the shortest amount of distance. So we are just kind of now with AI, we're trying to train them on different site data and like environmental data, elevation, all this stuff to predict where potential archaeological sites could be. Um, there is um, once a potential site has been identified using these initial techniques, fieldwork can begin. The first step is often what archaeologists call reconnaissance, which I think is a silly word because it feels so self-important. But reconnaissance is essentially just systematically walking through an area of interest and recording any and all relevant information. So taking photos, taking notes, not necessarily taking measurements or anything of that sort, but just going through. That is like usually the first initial step. This can also be paired with the use of satellite imagery, LiDAR scanning, which is light detection and ranging, which I'll get into in a moment, ground penetrating radar or GPR, and then forms of magnetometry or just metal detecting. Um, these combined methods allow archaeologists to gather a comprehensive view of a potential site, helping focus efforts on areas that are more likely to yield valuable finds. Well, this is a meticulous and slow process. History took thousands of years to get here. We don't need to be fast with this. We need to be careful and we need to preserve them. So it is something that takes time. Satellites are, this is just, I'm going to go into a couple different definitions of things. Satellites are uh, defined as objects that orbit another object in space. So technically, the moon is a satellite of the Earth, and the Earth is a satellite of the sun. Um, with that said, though, when talking about satellites, I mean, at least in normal conversation, you're not thinking, yes, look at that nice satellite in the sky. No, that is the moon. We get that. um, you are often thinking of human launch satellites, which are, just artificially made, sent into the sky, and then they kind of usually, I mean, it's more so space junk than anything. But satellites can also be for science and imaging and all sorts of fun stuff. Um, the most common type of satellite are Earth imaging satellites, or Earth observation satellites. These capture images like this of the Earth. Here we have a beautiful view of the bottom horn of Africa and parts of Antarctica. Um, but these capture high resolution images, helping archaeologists survey larger areas or regions of interest. Um, in addition to standard imaging, thermal imaging is also employed by various sites. This is NASA's Aster, or an image of the Aster satellite that uses infrared technology to read the heat temperatures of different areas of a site of interest throughout the day. As say if you go down into your basement, you notice it's a lot cooler under there. But you go outside, say it's like 75 degrees outside. You go, you touch the soil, you're like, okay, that's kind of warm. You go into your basement and then you're like, oh, it's not the worst in here. Maybe a little bit damp, maybe a little bit disgusting. I don't know what your basement is, but New England doesn't have a lot of finished basements, um, at least in older houses. Um, but if you feel the rock there, you'll feel that it's a lot cooler. Um, so if you got a lot of rocks in one place, usually human made, especially if it's in a rigid structure or a straight line, which is huge, those will leave, and say they're buried under the ground, they'll leave different heat signatures when viewed. So over the course of a day or a week or a month or whatever it is, we'll look at these areas and be like, what could be under there? But yeah, so thermal imaging is also utilized. Another advanced technology in archaeology is LiDAR. This is a pretty cool image of what cars scan with LiDAR. I just liked it. There's a lot of colors. It's very pretty. But LiDAR, or light detection and ranging, is a method for creating 3D maps of surfaces. A LiDAR sensor emits laser beams that bounce off surfaces, whether it's the ground or an object. The sensor then calculates the distance by measuring how long it takes for the beam to return, and then by taking millions of these measurements, LiDAR produces highly accurate scans of the area in question, revealing intricate details such as elevation changes and even hidden structures. With certain models and certain types of beams, and the complexity and the time that you have, the technology can see through dense forest cover. We're using it extensively now throughout the Amazon rainforest to find highway networks and to find these earthwork mounds that we thought, Amazon couldn't even be inhabited by any means, but we find all this there. Um, and this LiDAR data it ranges in accuracy from 1 to 10 millimeters to 10 to 50 centimeters on the high end. That is insane. There, we are able to fly a plane going, ooh, up, down, up, down, up, down, almost doing like suicides, over an area, um, and get an incredibly highly detailed map down to the grain of grass. It is insanity. And as battery technology improves and flight technology advances, especially now we see with unmanned and personal drones, and the batteries and computer chips getting smaller and smaller, LiDAR's capabilities will only grow, and I am expecting to see it, you know, become even more useful in the future of archaeology. Um, yeah, no. I had a whole section explaining laser beams and how the state of excitement is something that's important. But that's no mind that. Just know laser beams create these surfaces for us, or they create these images of these surfaces for us. We also use ground penetrating radar, or GPR. GPR, like LiDAR, uses waves to examine surface features, but instead of light, GPR uses radio waves or microwaves. As said, in the name, it's ground penetrating. This is looking at what is below the surface of us. This is a fairly modern take on what ground penetrating radar is used for. Um, so what you would do is you have usually like a push cart or something like that, and you roll it over an area, and you have the survey directions. So say if I'm going left to right, um, and a transmitter emits these radio waves or microwaves through the surface. And then as it goes through the surface, they all bounce back up, at different speeds and different times. And we measure it, and we get fairly accurate maps of what below the surface looks like. So, as seen on the left there, there's a drainage pipe indicated by that circle. It has like a faster speed of return than just normal soil. So if we see something fairly uniform, or like just a uniform break in the soil, we'll see it's the mixing of like E1, E2, and E3 zones. But if there's an anomaly in there, there's some different sharp angles because Clay is a lot more rigid, or like a clay pot or a fragment of that is going to be a lot more rigid in its edges than the soil around it. We'll be like, huh, there might be something under there. Um, we're able to calculate this depth and understand very, very accurately, down to the millimeter, where an object will be, by using the formula of distance equals the speed of the wave times time divided by two. Um, uh, GPR also measures something called dielectric permittivity, which is the ability of materials to store electricity. So different materials, such as like I said, a clay pot, a stone wall, a metal sword, or something like that, will all hold electricity differently, and will send back the waves, and will dilute the waves essentially, in different ways. So we're able to also tell what the chemical makeup of the surface below us is, and what that object could be. This is invaluable to archaeology, as we want to know what we're digging. We're not going to just go about willy-nilly and dig something up and be like, whoops, broke the pot. That's not something we want to do. But usually pots are broken. So when you see the ones in the museum, those are very, very, very special finds. Usually you find something like that big, and you get excited over it. Um, but yeah, all these non-invasive procedures are really very helpful to the field. All right, so now I've gotten a good amount of the science, or at least the understanding and the base level of what the science behind imaging and finding these sites is. Let's get to our first site. This is the CD Fields complex. CD Fields is a Neolithic archaeological site located on the northern coast of County Mayo in the northwest of Ireland. The site covers a little over 100 square kilometers, or 62 miles, and is characterized by an extensive system of stone enclosed fields, and there's also a megalithic court tomb. However, that is not that modern triangular pyramid thing in the background. That is their museum. What we find is what's in front of us. It is these rocks, essentially. These are the ruins of this stone field system. Um, this is one of the largest and oldest known field systems known today, well, stone field systems, dating back to about 4500 BC. The fields primarily supported the cultivation of crops such as wheat and barley, similar to what was present in the Fertile Crescent, as that is, they were very willing to be tamed and used. They're like, yeah, please, we can't wait. Eat us, spread us, you know? um, Unique aspect of the CD Fields, though, is this a site lays beneath a thick layer of blanket bog or blanket peat, which is kind of that, um, like at the end of the rock shelf there, you see the dark soil and like the cutout. That's called peat. Um, Bogs are genuinely like the perfect environment for the preservation of soft tissue and organic material. Um, Archaeologists can estimate the age of a site by studying the different layers of blanket bog peat, as it is living in carbon. We're able to tell, how different things grew, and how often, and if there's volcanic ash in the air, all sorts of stuff. The lowest layer, known as the basal peat, um, marks the beginning of the peat formation, as peat bogs often are formed. Um, they're not usually the first thing that's formed in an area. Usually there's some type of intervention, which in this case very well may have been the introduction of these fields to begin the bogification, I'll say, of this. But this basal peat, or the lowest layer of peat, offers insight into the chronology of where we are. Additionally, there's something called the pine flush, or at least in different bogs across a lot of Europe, um, there's something called a pine flush, which are the remains of pine trees, specifically the Pinus sylvestris, or the Scots pine, which is popular across um, across northern Europe and Scotland and Ireland specifically. The pine flush serves as it's called a terminus antequem, which means it's the latest possible date in which the site could have been constructed. As I'll go into in just a second, um, peat bogs are terrible for plant growth. There is, I mean, as you see in front of you in this picture, it is a fairly monocultured ecosystem. There's not a lot of plant life that's growing there aside from this peat. Um, Especially no trees. There's no trees in this image, and there's very few in the one I showed you earlier of the aerial image of Ireland. Um, but these pines are essentially the last moment before the bogs could have formed. Um, so, to someone who has not studied dirt for hours on end, I mean, dirt, moss, dead trees. This sounds like a kind of a whole lot of word salad. Um, but as the purpose of this presentation is, I mean, this is so then my hours of studying dirt, moss, and dead trees, amongst other things, does not go in vain. Um, let's start off with bogs. Bogs are a type of wetland ecosystem that forms in areas with high rainfall and low drainage. Water tends to flow downhill, and areas that are either lower in elevation or flat are more likely to accumulate water. Um, this leads to something called waterlogging. This is the critical first step in bog formation. Waterlogging occurs when water replaces air in the soil, which would be like if you flooded your house floor to ceiling and then, someone told you, go live in there. You couldn't really do that. Life doesn't like to exist in there. Um, it's Waterlogging is one of the first steps in essential steps in the creation of bogs, and also the growth and development of anaerobic respiration, which is very important, the preservation of organic materials. Um, as stated before, these are peat bogs. Peat, what is that? Um, Peat is an accumulation of partially decayed organic material, primarily plant matter, that builds up in waterlogged, low oxygen environments such as bogs. Over thousands of years, the accumulation of dead plant materials, including moss, grass, and other vegetation, gets compacted into layers. However, due to the rate of decomposition of the environments, the material doesn't fully break down, allowing it to accumulate and form peat. This process is a vital part of the carbon cycle, and as peat acts as a long-term carbon sink, storing carbon and preventing its release into the atmosphere, which thus induces decomposition. One of the most significant contributors to peat formation is something called sphagnum moss or Sphagnacea, a hardy and adaptable plant that plays a central role in creating the conditions necessary for peat accumulation. By influencing the chemical, physical, and biological environment of bogs, sphagnum moss helps to build the thick layers of peat that we have found in these ecosystems. Um, so the key processes that involve sphagnum moss. First, we have the dynamics of the nutrients in this ecosystem. Sphagnum is well adapted to nutrient-poor environments. It thrives there due to this lack of available nutrients. It competes effectively with other plants by sequestering essential ions like nitrogen and phosphorus, outcompeting other vegetation for these limited resources. Um, they do this through having high levels of hydrogen ions, which essentially what you want is you want to have a lot of hydrogen ions. You want to reach on the scale of acidity and basicness, you want to reach neutrality. That's usually what things want to do. Not a lot really survives or thrives in acidic environments or more basic environments. You want that neutrality, that 7 point. Um, but sphagnum moss has a lot of hydrogen ions, and because of this, they acidify the environments that they're in. Um, it, Sphagnum moss also decomposes incredibly slowly. The bog's low temperature and water logging contribute to this. Um, It retains its own nutrients, essentially recycling itself. Um, so it contributes. It doesn't need a lot of nutrients to survive. So the body it leaves behind when, the plant starts to die doesn't have much for other plants to live and grow off of. Um, so because of this, it creates an oligotrophic ecosystem or state of the ecosystem where nutrients are constantly recycled by the things that can take in the nutrients at that same level. So just think of it kind of like a coral reef or like an oyster reef, where both of those animals survive off of eating the calcium carbonate or like recycling the calcium carbonate of the of the animals that came before them. They attach themselves to the dead bodies. It's really kind of grim, but it's cool. So as briefly touched on, the sphagnum moss acidifies the environment through a process called cation exchange. The moss absorbs positively charged ions like potassium and magnesium, which are both very important for plant growth, from the soil, and then it releases its hydrogen ions into the surrounding environment. The increase in hydrogen ions lowers the pH of the bog, making the environment more acidic. The lowered pH inhibits the activity of decomposers that thrive in neutral or basic conditions, effectively slowing down the breakdown of organic material. Um, the sphagnum moss also um, is unique in its water retention sense. The structure of sphagnum moss includes a specialized cells known as hyaline cells. These aren't dead cells themselves, but they act like sponges, storing large amounts of water through a porous and hydrophilic membrane. This water retention saturates the ecosystem, keeping it persistently waterlogged. This excess water, as previously mentioned, prevents oxygen from reaching the soil, creating anaerobic or oxygen-deprived conditions. In such environments, microbial activity is drastically reduced, and the decomposition of organic matter is further slowed down. Um, just overall, things need oxygen to survive, and when you don't have oxygen there, not much is going to survive. Or it has to adapt, which many microorganisms do. Um, but by essentially being able to hold on to this large amount of water and creating this environment and slowly seeping out the oxygen from the water, because remember, water is H and then it's hydrogen and two oxygen atoms. There's oxygen in there. Um, oh wait, did I get that wrong? Uh-oh, that's not good. um, yeah, but yeah, it holds on to that and slowly seeps out the oxygen from it while depriving the environment of being oxygen rich. Um, yeah. So, and then over centuries, the continuous input of dead sphagnum moss on top of the other creates these layers. So like dead sphagnum, living sphagnum, or like dead sphagnum, living sphagnum, Um, so they create their own perfect environment. They are the one of the perfect recyclers of of the world. It's a keystone species in bog ecosystems, and it is inherent when it comes to bogs. And because of this, it is incredibly important to us as archaeologists. Um, Microbes are also an essential and omnipresent source of life on Earth. Microbes are genuinely everywhere. It's said that if you took a teaspoon of topsoil, you'd have at least 1 billion individual microorganisms in that teaspoon alone. I wish I took one with me. I wish I had a visual to show you, but um, yeah, this is insanity. There is life everywhere. And like most life, it relies on oxygen to survive. Oxygen is one of the key components of cellular respiration. Cellular respiration is a process by which cells convert glucose and oxygen into energy, or ATP, carbon dioxide, which is our waste product, and water. This process occurs in three main stages. There's glycolysis, the citric acid cycle, and the electron transport chain. In the presence of oxygen, cells use what is called aerobic respiration, which is highly efficient and produces a large amount of energy. Um, Oxygen has it wants to give away all of its electrons. It wants to give you all of its energy all the time. It wants to reach a sense of homeostasis almost. Um, However, in bogs and other oxygen deprived environments, such as wetlands or deep soil or even deep sea, we see this around like geothermal vents in the use of um, what is it? Chemosynthesis, which is a really cool chemical process. But that's besides the point. um, Microbes either die or they switch to anaerobic respiration, or typically called fermentation, to generate energy. Processes that are much less efficient than aerobic respiration. Aerobic processes produce byproducts like anaerobic processes produce byproducts like methane or lactic acid. This contributes to the unique chemical environment of bogs. To visualize this shift, think of aerobic respiration as like running a marathon, or like using oxygen um, to respire or like replenish your cells. Um, to Imagine that as if you were running a marathon with proper training, proper food, proper dieting, all this stuff. Um, Versus anaerobic respiration, which is if you in your state right now were just plopped at the very beginning of the Boston Marathon and we're told to make it, without any qualifying time, without any previous like methods, you just got to make it. Um, the scientific reasons for the switch from aerobic to anaerobic respiration, it just essentially things switch over. It's We don't really need to get into that all too much. But things want to survive, and microbes are highly adaptable, and they will try to survive if possible. Um, so all of this contributes to the fact that the bogs are perfect. The bogs do not want to break down stuff. I mean, if you have a lot more energy, you can do a lot more work. Um, and because of this low energy, these lazy microbes, um, if you have organic materials like animal carcass or human bodies or plants or whatever it is, um, they won't break down. They won't die because the microbes are not getting the right amount of food. You're not going to be expected to run a marathon without, training, without having the energy to do so. And these microbes thus uh, continue the cycle of anaerobic respiration by producing methane, and in the case of sphagnum moss, by keeping the environment hostile to other aerobic loving um, organisms. All right. So now that a lot of the science is out of the way, I still have a little bit more. Don't worry. I know that's your favorite part of it in a history class, but um, let's see. Um, but science is out of the way. What does this site actually tell us about the world? Um, the CD fields is direct evidence of the development present during the Neolithic Revolution. So when we see massive population growth, we see climate change, we see all this sorts of stuff. Um, the stone walls, as previously mentioned, are direct evidence of the shift from the Mesolithic hunter-gatherer way of a more nomadic life, or like a more seasonal life, to a sedentary lifestyle. The size of the walls also show us just the amount of coordination and the extent of the population that would have had to existed there to sustain this field system. On the site also lays a megalithic monument known as the Behi Court Tomb, which is unfortunately not pictured here. There was only really, really low image, like resolution images of it. But that's besides the point. Um, the Behi Court Tomb is on par with many of the other court tombs found throughout the north of Ireland and Scotland. It's part of something But this site is part of something called the Great Western Concentration. There was a large population um, of people living around the western coast of Ireland around this time, the northwestern coast. And in this specific area, it was something crazy, like 70 megalithic tombs. It's impressive to say the least. Um, the entrance of the tomb faces the east towards the rising sun, as most megalithic tombs, both across the West and Islamic worlds or the Middle Eastern worlds, did at the time. It's significance in that, um, you rise upon new life and death, and you want to have light coming into this tomb because it's buried under the ground. Um, this tomb, however, is a little bit different in the layout of other tombs. Typically, you would have like a small passageway to get into the main crypt or the main like room of this tomb. However, this one you just walk straight in and you're like, oh my God, crypt! Whoa, crazy! And then there's two other smaller rooms off to the side. They think that that was used to like process offerings and like make prayer and stuff like that. But they found different shards of Neolithic pottery and grain material that we've been able to date and see that it was from about 4500 BC. Overall, the CD Fields paints a complex picture into life and the values of the Neolithic world. Um, Next, we head over to just north of Dublin to yet another peat bog. This peat bog, though, is being harvested. In the modern day, peat is used for energy production. The use of peat is quite similar to that of coal. Both are carbon-based fossil fuels forming from the decayed matter of life. Peat, however, has a much lower energy yield than coal, as coal is formed and condensed under the immense pressure of hundreds to thousands of meters of layered soil, and is the culmination of millions and millions of years of like life. Peat is only takes about a couple thousand years. Whoa, that's crazy. I'll never see a new peat bog formed, but that's a lot less time. But because of that, peat therefore burns at a more rapid rate and a more reasonable temperature, which is used extensively across the regions that it forms as an alternative fuel, mostly used for stoves, fireplaces, and small generators for electricity. Usually you'll find it out in rural Ireland more than anything. But because of this need and abundance, people have harvested peat for the longest time. In 2003, however, a man was harvesting peat for sale, and unknowingly he discovered one of the most well-preserved pieces of Ireland's archaeological record to date. Now, I'm giving a little content warning. There is going to be a shriveled man in the next slide. This is the Cloney Man. The Cloney Man, he stands at a staggering 5 foot 2 inches tall. He has brown hair fashioned into a mohawk. He did so with a specific hair gel. He eats a rich diet of meat and vegetables, and he is presumably quite rich. Dillon, this man is incredibly dead. Oh, I hear you, and I see you. And I agree. This man is indeed incredibly dead. He is nearly 1,800 years dead, in fact. How do we know this, and why in the hell am I showing you a dead body? I'm happy you asked, theoretical audience. I just got a notification my phone is going to die, so let's make this quick. We know the age of this man thanks to radiocarbon dating. We know his height well because one half of him, as seen, there's not a bottom half, is approximately that of a 5'2" tall man. His hair, his style, it stayed impeccably intact all these years thanks to the previously mentioned our friend the Pete Bog. um, and due to this last resting place, his supper and his choice of pomade was also remains. For his income, however, we'll have to go to the nipples and then back to the hair, as one naturally does. Okay, a little bit back to science. As I mentioned before, radiocarbon dating. this is one of the most invaluable techniques and sources used throughout archaeological research. Sorry, my dad was calling me. Carbon-14 dating, also known as radiocarbon dating, is the method used to determine the age of an organic material by measuring the content of carbon-14 in a radioactive isotope of carbon. And the process kind of works like this. So at the top, we have cosmic rays, which is just the sun rays. Carbon-14, it's created in the atmosphere where it's nitrogen rich. Um, sorry, I had my notes up. The carbon-14 is created in the atmosphere where cosmic rays collide with nitrogen atoms, or nitrogen-14, converting them into carbon-14. The nitrogen atom, what happens is it absorbs the proton coming from the cosmic rays and undergoes a nuclear reaction, which results in the ejection of a neutron and creates carbon-14. So carbon-14 is the waste product of nitrogen taking in a proton coming from the sun. Um, the new carbon-14 atom gets incorporated into carbon dioxide, or CO2, which is then absorbed by living organisms, whether it be us or a cow or a plant or something like that. And then it is taken in by us either through photosynthesis or consumption. Um, while an organism is alive, it continually exchanges carbon with its environment, maintaining a constant ratio of carbon-12 to carbon-14 in its body, similar to the ratio that we find in the atmosphere. Um, Once the organism dies, it stops absorbing carbon from the environment, and the carbon-14 of the tissues begin to decay. The decay occurs in a known rate with a half-life of about 5,730 years, meaning half of the carbon-14 in a sample decays into nitrogen. I'm so sorry. Get that. Into nitrogen-14 every 5,730 years. Um, so scientists measure the remaining amounts of carbon-14 in the sample using a technique called accelerator mass spectrometry. I'm not going to go fully into that. I don't think I have nearly enough time. But essentially, you excite the whatever you're studying. So you run an electrical current through it, or you make it just move really, really, really fast and see just how much of the stuff decays and how quickly it does. Because we're able to see the different decay chains of different elements and the speed of them, and measure them through different means. Um, the To calculate it, we take the number of half-lives that have elapsed during the we see how many times the what is it? The carbon-14 decays within a certain period of time. So if only like a quarter of the original carbon-14 would remain, there would be approximately two half-lives, or about 1,460 years, and we'd be able to tell how old something is by that. Um, so we use this on wood, bone, plant fibers, humans, um, whatever it is. Specifically in animals, we like to use the teeth because the teeth absorb, or usually are preserved better than most materials, and they absorb the most amount of carbon when you eat. It's like in the enamel, and you see it in the bone structure. It's kind of cool. Um, using this, archaeologists were able to compare the data collected from the hair gel present in the man's locks, his luscious locks, to match the ingredients of pine sap and resin to a specific species of pine that lived on the southwestern coast, or like that existed on the southwestern coast of France. Because of this, we better understand at least the extent of trade throughout the different worlds. Um, this is evidence that leads us to believe that this man was rich. I mean, this is a true luxury item. I'm not ordering imported stuff every day myself, and we're in a lot more modern world than this man was living in. So to have something from as far away as France, especially a cosmetic item like hair gel, it's impressive. Um, the So, because of this, some people, some archaeologists have been led to believe that he may have been royalty, or at least had some ties to the throne. And I don't fully disagree with that. Um, Around 200 AD, it was believed in Irish cultures that if you sucked on the king's nipple, it was a sign of submission. Don't ask me why. I genuinely didn't. I don't think we know that, but that's just whatever. I mean, that's a weird thing. But around 200 AD, we believe that. And then on the Cloney Cavan man, he has no nipples, and he was also presumably ritualistically killed. The Garda, like it's called the Garda Technical Bureau. Did an investigation on this body. They were the ones who did the forensics on it, and they figured out how he died. He had a big gash in the top of his head, another in the chest, and then there was another one somewhere. I can't remember exactly where, but he died, and the FBI was like, "We're getting down to it," or the Irish equivalent. Um, but yeah, he was mutilated at the nipples, which would disallow him to take the throne, and then he was killed and put into a bog. So he was doing all right. All right. And then finally, for the last site, I have the Black Friary Monastery. Black Friary is this site seen here in all like 6 pixels. It was established in 1263 by Geoffrey de Geneville. Um, it was a Dominican friary located in Trim, County Meath, near the heart of the Boyne Valley, which is a very historic valley in Ireland. It's where the New Grange site is found. It's where a lot of different archaeological sites are located, including the Cloney Cavan man. Um, this this monastery existed and was running from, like I said, 1263 up until 1540 with the dissolution of monasteries by Henry VIII. You know, gotta love him. He did terrible, terrible, terrible things. Um, Black Friary is important because it is one of the only Irish friaries to feature cloisters or a court. Um, and then it's also, I mean, like, it is the largest of its kind in Ireland. Um, it was presumably very affluent and well traversed. This is evident through the evidence of Purbeck marble. This is Henry VIII chasing out the the monks, and they're taking all their golden wares and relics. You know, this is kind of seen as almost a good thing in this comic, but um, they're definitely making fun of King Henry. I mean, they have this little snot like snouted dogs, and the monastery, the monk is just running away, and everyone else is like, ah. um, but yeah, we believe that this is fairly affluent. This is the Dominican seal, but the presence of Purbeck marble is important um, in this discovery. Purbeck is a region of Dorset in England, which is seen on the right over there. Um, it is from the south of England, and Purbeck marble is valued for its beautiful color, its strong crystal structure, which thus leads it to be good for use in large uh, abbeys or cathedrals. Um, and then also through the presence of medieval stained glass. Not this specifically, this is a standing church, but they found a lot of different stained glass, which shows just how affluent this monastery was. Um, this shows us the extent of kind of how the monastic system worked and how the monasteries thrived throughout Ireland, and why Henry VIII didn't like that, because the monasteries held more power than him, and that cannot be happening because Henry VIII had a Napoleon complex before there was a Napoleon complex. That guy had some serious issues. um, by the 18th century, the monastery and the friary was essentially in ruins. it was being used. It had always been used as a cemetery for the people of Trim. However, by the 18th century, it was used as a Chilean cemetery. The monasteries were often used as this. It was kind of as a way to kind of offend, kind of not. Um, Chilean, I don't know if I'm saying that correctly, but Chilean cemeteries are cemeteries for the children and the unborn, or like the babies and the unborn. So in this site, they have found over 120 remains of mostly children, and also some older people from older times, but a lot of different children. Um, the monastery was used, the stones of it was used to quarry, as quarries for other buildings and other projects around the area. However, remarkably, the footprint of this friary was never built over. So, because of that, we still have evidence of it. We still have the full footprint of this friary. And today, as seen in this picture here, we have the Blackfriary Archaeological Field School, which is one of the few and the only publicly owned field schools in the United States, in Ireland, and in the world. Um, the town of Trim owns this, and the public kind of decides on it and funds it. But it is an invaluable resource in the study and furthering of the archaeological field. Um, Through this, we'll be able to further understand, the extent of Ireland, and we'll be able to understand the extent of a monastic system throughout the medieval era. Um, and they're on their it's their 10th year in 2025. They've been Oh no, this year it operated in 2014. So 10 years they've been going on strong. And they found a lot of cool stuff. And every year they decide a different area of to focus on within the monastery. It's kind of cool. Um, but yeah, no, that is all. Yeah, let me bring me up fully. Thank you for listening to that. I know that was really long, but I thoroughly enjoyed this. I I like getting into the science of things, and I like getting into just go into depth about the history of places, and the field of archaeology allows me to do that. And somewhere as personal for me as Ireland, it was nice. And yeah, that's about it. Um, I had a lot more to say, but I feel like I've gone on far too long. I mean, it said 15 minutes, and then he told me it didn't have to be 15 minutes, and I was like, oh, okay. But yeah, no, that is all. Thank you. Thank you to my classmates. I thoroughly enjoyed this class. If any of you watch this, cool. Um, Thank you, Professor Fox. You have been invaluable in teaching me and in having me understand different methods of learning and appreciating how to teach and how to look at history. But yeah, no, that is all. Best of luck on the finals, and I will see you guys. All right, cool. How do I end this?